For a tailored crop and pasture management program and to plan your seed, ag chem and fertiliser, find your local PGG Wrightson technical field representative at store.pggwrightson.co.nz.
Now it's time for our PGG Wrightson's agronomy segment. Now, we all know getting stock onto crops, that does sound simple, but it's one of those areas where things can go wrong quickly if you don't get the basics right, from dry matter feed quality through to nitrates, fibre and water. There's a lot to think about. Jason Leslie from PGG Wrightson's is a vet who works closely with farmers exactly on this. G'day, Jason. Welcome to the show, mate. Really appreciate it.
G'day, Andy. Good to be here.
Good to be with you again. Now, first and foremost, what is the biggest mistake farmers make when they're looking to transition stock onto crops?
Well, the biggest mistake we see is humans aren't the most patient of species on the planet, and we tend to rush things. Transition is about setting that animal up to be able to take advantage of the investment in the new crop, but their gut system needs a bit of time to do that. So we've got to help that animal go from pasture to the new crop.
So they've come from pretty much pasture grass, right? And so it's a winter feed. Farmers have spent a lot of money on getting their crops ready. Their stock are worth a lot of money as well. The last thing we want is to have any issues. Time. So what's the best way with time? What is the time, and what do you think is a step-by-step system?
Yeah, so what I mean by time is, look, we're talking about the brassica crops mainly here. So be that the leafy brassicas, the kales, the rapes, things like that, or the bulb crops, fodder, beet, Swedes, turnips. That's quite a different forage system to pasture. So generally we're talking at least 14 days and up to 21 days before the rumen has adjusted. So we've got to introduce things slowly during that time length and use fibre as our friend. Fibre helps the bugs in the rumen adjust to the new food source and be able to digest that and do it efficiently.
So when you say fibre, what are we looking at? What's the ideal fibre to be using during this transition period?
Yeah, so the most common source of fibre, we need effective fibre in the rumen so the bugs can break that fibre down and help utilise the protein and energy in the new food source effectively. Generally, we're using and relying on hay or straws. You can use standing fibre in a runoff paddock, so rough, longer grass. Summer or autumn saved forage will have a higher dry matter percentage and a higher effective fibre in it rather than lush pasture. So it's either conserved feed, hays, baleages, silages, or standing long vegetation.
Is there what about quantity then? Is there obviously you're transitioning, you want your stock to be eating the new feed, but you also want them to be eating the fibre, right? How do you quantify the fibre amount in the diet percentage-wise?
Yeah, well, first of all, you need to set your goals of what is the total diet required for the class of stock you're dealing with, and also, is it maintenance, or are you trying to achieve live weight gain or body condition score increase? So you need to know that. So what would the total diet be required by the animal, be it a cow or a sheep? And then you need to work back and say, right, on day one, we only want a very small percentage of the total diet consumed to be of the new forage source. So for a simple example, if the intake was going to be a total diet of, say, 10 kilograms of dry matter required by the animal, you wouldn't want any more than 1 to 1.5 kilograms on that first day one and day two of the new source. The rest would need to be pre-existing diet or made up heavily of the fibre source. But you still need to cater for the total amount of energy for maintenance as a bare minimum, or more than maintenance for growth.
Yeah, so initially it could be a large amount of fibre being in that diet, right, before you do that.
Yes.
So we're talking about the risk. Obviously, what about, I mean, water, fresh water obviously is crucial, and that's just got to be ad-libbed.
Yes, correct. And so you need to look at your paddocks and how you're going to be grazing the paddocks. What is the pre-existing trough setups, and can all stock have access to those troughs? And in a lot of situations, you've got to put in movable temporary water supplies that moves with the break as they consume the paddock effectively. So plenty of access to water is critical, and it's one of the animal welfare musts. They've got to have access to water, even in the middle of winter, and even grazing these crops that have quite high water content still need access to free water.
Yeah, and as you quite rightly said, then these are temporary water supplies a lot of the time now because of the grazing practices to reduce runoff and pugging and all these sort of issues, right? So
yes.
It's not just a simple case of throwing a trough in the paddock and saying, oh, that's going to be good. It's the quantity of the water as well.
Yeah, and in some cases it's multiple troughs in these bigger mobs, so they've got plenty of access. Yeah.
The risk of getting it wrong is quite horrendous, and each year we do hear, unfortunately, still stories of issues, particularly around nitrates build up. Just talk to us a little bit as a vet. What's actually going on here? What's the risk? And just to explain to people listening, how it can go wrong.
So, probably the two things we see in transition issues. One is the potential for nitrate toxicity, and the other one is where we get acidosis. But I'll focus on nitrate first, to your question. Nitrates, so what happens is plants are given side applications of nitrogen-based fertilisers to make them grow and optimise their potential yield. And depends when it's given, and also a whole lot of other factors such as rainfall, soil types, the way the plant is grown, whether that nitrogen that's been applied is uptaken by the plant and efficiently converted into proteins in the leaf or in the bulb or stem of the plant that can be utilised by the animals grazing it. Now, sometimes the nitrogen is taken up very quickly and not converted into forms that the animals can handle. And we get this accumulation of nitrates in the plant, which when eaten by ruminants gets converted and affects the ability of the red blood cells to be able to carry oxygen around the body. So what happens if we've got too high a nitrate in the plant, oxygen gets bound up and the animals start to effectively start to suffocate slowly. They haven't got enough oxygen in their system. They become staggery, weak, will collapse, and then lead to death. Often before we get to those exaggerated stages, you can actually get fetal death. So what I mean by that is the lack of oxygen across the placenta can kill the developing fetuses. So sometimes we won't see dead animals physically, but we can get abortions in the week to 2 weeks following introduction to these toxic crops. So we can test for it. It means you've got to plan ahead.
Yeah.
It's getting organised and going, right, we might have put some fertiliser on, 6, 8, 10 weeks ago. We've had dry conditions, cloudy conditions where the plant may not be actively growing well. We better get on and test it. And there's a couple of different tests. One is a colour change one. That gives you an okay reading on what's going on. It's quick, but with our brassicas, it can be a bit unreliable in getting accurate information. So a better test is to send samples off to a laboratory and get a number. That's what we call wet chemistry, but that takes time. So you need to be thinking about testing a good week, at least a week, before you introduce stock to the crop. Don't do it as you open and shut the gate because you're not going to get those answers that quickly. And I can tell you now, hungry stock going on to toxic or high plants with high levels of nitrates is not a good recipe.
So if you find that you do have high levels of nitrates in the plants, it's not the fact you can't use those plants, right? You've just got to spend more time during the transition to get them used to it.
True. If they're highly toxic, you have to be very careful. But fibre is your friend, remember? Filling the rumen up with fibre and slowing down and giving minimal access to crops that might be marginally elevated, you still can get away with it, and the animals will build tolerance over time, but there is still risk around the fetus. So knowing which stock class is going on to these potentially dangerous crops, you might have to change which paddock gets grazed by what class of stock to reduce risk.
Right.
But I guess the take-home point is information gives you power to make better informed decisions.
Well, that was my last question. One key piece of advice that is often overlooked, obviously testing, getting that information before you put the stock in that paddock.
Yeah, because it can happen very quickly. If, within an hour, animals can have collapsed and died from nitrate toxicity. So it hits very fast in some situations. And it's not just the brassica crops, it can be young grass and green feed cereals can also suffer from it.
Yeah, because it's basically the nitrogen in the plant, the nitrates in the plant that's causing the problem. All right, Jason, obviously we can talk about this for quite some time. We didn't get a chance to talk about acidosis, but that is also another big problem on, transitioning onto crops as well. So, look, really appreciate your time. Great to have you with us here on CountryWide Connect today.
Thank you.
All right, that is Jason Leslie there. Yes, good practical advice on how, if you're planting crops or feed this season, make sure you contact PGG Wrightson's to plan your crop and pasture requirements. You can find your local technical field rep or store team at store.pggwrightsons.co.nz.
Every season brings new challenges. PGG Wrightson works alongside you in the field, delivering practical agronomy advice where it matters.